Hello, everybody. Welcome to the CPL Newsroom presented by Volkswagen. Charlie O'Connor Clark, joined by Mitchell Tierney, and it's Friday, which is already a weird time for us to be doing one of these. There must be something going on. Mitchell, I don't know if you heard, but the Canadian men's national team is playing in a final on Sunday against the United States. Concacaf Nations League, they beat Panama 2-0 last night in Las Vegas. We were both watching it, and I think we're just here to kind of take that all in, soak it in, and think about what this means for the Canadian national team program. So we're going to recap the game. We're going to look a little bit ahead at that final on Sunday. We're going to talk a little bit about that absolute insanity of a quote unquote football match that was at the same stadium after Canada between the US and Mexico. And we'll have some fun. If anybody has any comments, questions, drop them in the chat. We'll try to get to them. But Mitchell, just to start off, you've obviously been watching this national team for a long time. What is the feeling this morning knowing that Canada is going to play for a trophy on Sunday?
I mean, first and foremost, just like how different is it to watch this Canadian national team in recent years than it has been in the past, where like it was just such a, there was obviously moments and there always are going to be where Panama looked good, but it was such a comfortable performance from Canada and like arguably one of their most important CONCACAF games in a long time, like a semifinal. So that in itself is big, but yeah, it's a big moment for the program. Obviously, coming off of making the World Cup, coming off of what they did in World Cup qualifying, like you have to build on that. You have to sustain that, and getting back to a final so close to a World Cup, and just the way they did it as well is massively important and positive. So I think the feeling is mostly one of excitement overall.
It is, and it's interesting you talk about getting into a final so close after the World Cup. You wrote about it before the game. We've spoken about it before, but this is an opportunity for Canada to evolve as a team and show that the World Cup qualification cycle wasn't a flash in the pan, right? Because this program has had flashes in the pan before. They've had moments or cycles or tournaments where they've had a really good run, and then after that, it all falls apart and there's no sustained success, right? This is a moment where the World Cup was frustrating for Canada. They know that. I think there's a feeling in the team that maybe they played better at that World Cup than they're maybe given credit for domestically, at least. But this is where they kind of come of age and show that they continue to belong with the US, with the Mexicos, with the other teams in CONCACAF that they want to be ahead of, really, and firmly in that top three. We could talk about if that's a top three still in a second, but this is an important moment for this national team program. Let's get into the game against Panama a bit. It was a tough one. John Herdman said it was going to be a tough one from the start, right? He said the day before that Panama is one of the two most difficult opponents he's played in CONCACAF. I think I can now guess which of the U.S. and Mexico he's leaving out of that, considering how things went last night. But it was a really difficult game. It was so physical. And obviously, there's a Panama team that's been coached by Thomas Christensen for a while. They've moved to that back five recently, which I think is working, has been working for them a lot. They've played a lot of games recently, a lot of friendlies, including they went to Argentina and played Messi and only lost 2-0 in like one of those Argentine homecoming games in March, which I don't think gets enough credit for how Panama played in a game like that. But Panama's a tough team to beat. Mitch, what did you think that was working for Canada in that first half? Because I think they eventually found the places where the space was, right?
Yeah, I think they did, and you wrote about it really well. I think in your analysis, where they were trying to look in behind that high Panama line, and we really saw some of their playmakers. Sometimes Kone, Eustachio would find themselves in line with the back line, so that they could be the ones to play those balls over the top, but. They have players between Alistair Johnson, between Kamal Miller, who can connect those passes as well. So when you have so many options at the back that can move the ball forward, I thought that was really positive. And, their midfield, duo of Kone and Eustachio, maybe not quite as progressive as we've seen them in recent matches, but they also just didn't lose the ball. I mean, I think between the two of them, there was a couple of off moments from Kone I felt early on, but between the two of them, I think they played 6 passes that didn't find a recipient, which is pretty absurd for a midfield duo. So I think those things in particular were really solid. And then obviously, the movement up top of guys like Jonathan David to be able to get in behind and find himself in good positions. And then even, Kyle Larin later on in the half when Tajon found him for a good chance. I suppose that was the second half actually, but yeah, and I think just the the ability that they have to just have those attacking players who can think like that and find those spaces that open up are incredibly important. So that's what I liked from Canada.
Yeah, the movement up top was a big one for me. I think that this was actually a really, really good tactical performance from John Herdman.
Mm.
I think he generally got it right at the start, and Panama adjusted and he adjusted to counter, and that really worked out for him. But like at the beginning, he talked a lot about that back five and how Panama were going to keep it high and what Canada did to either try and ping those balls over the top, as you mentioned, or when they did take it along the ground, when they had that space out wide, they would have multiple runners at the back line trying to get in behind, right? You just look at the Jonathan David goal in the first half. You've got Sam Adekubi pulling one runner to the left with his run, Kyle Larin pulling somebody else to the right, and Jonathan David being just obviously the best striker in CONCACAF by getting on the end of that ball and putting it between the legs of the goalkeeper. It was a really, really, I mean, it's a goal that looks really good on the surface, but then when you look at everything that's happening off the ball as well, it gets even more impressive, right? And then in the second half, we got to talk about the second half because Panama had Canada on the ropes at times in the first maybe 10 minutes of that, right? And I think a lot of people could see that Panama were finding those balls through the middle. If Canada's going wide all the time, then there's nobody in the middle, and they're just playing the ball there, especially when Kone and Distachio are covering so much ground in the center of the park. And then we'll talk about the Davies sub in a second, but bringing Jonathan Osorio into the game at that point, I think for me was exactly what Canada needed. And it's really encouraging that John Herdman notices that immediately, pretty early at the hour mark. And I don't know if it was already the plan to get Osorio into the game at that point. It probably was, but to bring him on instead of like as a third midfielder instead of for Ismail Kone as it might have been, I think that's kind of a moment that turned the game a little bit for Canada and gave them a little bit more control. But I mean, I guess we'll move on to bringing Davies on at that point, though, right, Mitchell? That's just a special player, isn't that?
Well, quickly on the Osorio substitution, I mean that's like a lesson learned, I think, from the World
Mm-hmm.
Cup, where that was the substitution maybe they needed to make against
Right.
Croatia, certainly, and we were all kind of yelling that they didn't make that one soon enough, and they make it in this game right away when things start to go wrong. But I think all of the substitutions I think were very important. I mean, Davies, the obvious one, he comes on. Panama, just as a country, having nightmares about Alphonso Davies at this point and what he's able to do. And I think it's 7 minutes after coming on, he scores that incredible wonder goal and combines with Jonathan David. And, it's another fantastic moment from those two. But another underrated substitution I thought was, bringing on Scott Kennedy and how important he is, again, in winning the ball that led to that Davies goal, but also just, with Vitoria at his age and having 2 games back to back with Alistair Johnson not fully fit as well, kind of coming back from injury, having another player like that who's just been so reliable at the back for Canada as Scott Kennedy is critical. And I thought he did a great job of, again, at a time when Canada was maybe feeling a bit of the pressure, Kennedy came in and was solid right away. So I thought, yeah, like you said, tactically, John Herdman started the match well. He managed the match well. That's a good sign against a difficult Panama team.
Absolutely. Just a reminder, anybody watching, get your questions in the chat. We kind of inadvertently answered other Mitchell's question here about having a third midfielder in the park. I do think more generally, is Canada better with a third midfielder? I lean to the general answer being yes, but it is situational. Obviously, I think in games against opponents where you're going to have more of the ball, they kind of want to get more of those wide threats on the pitch. It is difficult to get Davies, David, Larin, Tajon Buchanan all on the pitch at the same time and also have 3 midfielders in there. Yeah. It's almost impossible. But I think in games against higher quality opponents, I mean, Panama for one, but we saw it against Croatia. They're coming up against the U.S., a pretty confident U.S. team on Sunday. I think for me, you definitely have to have 3 bodies in that midfield, even if Weston McKennie and Tyler Adams aren't in that lineup. There's definitely going to be a big battle there. Maybe we should just start looking ahead to that game then, because Mitchell, you said you watched some of that U.S. Mexico game this morning. I was watching it live last night. That was insane.
Yeah.
From so many facets. The U.S. and Mexico, I think we have to be real about where we stand. There's no touching that rivalry in Concacaf. We can talk about Canada being rivals with the U.S. and we are, but that is something else, right? I think we saw it last night. Poor Fuller and Balogun got a rude introduction, I think, to that rivalry. Just Mitchell, tell me about what you saw from the U.S. that Canada's going to have to play on Sunday.
Yeah, I think there was a lot to like about the U.S. performance. First and foremost, obviously, Christian Pulisic. I think that's the best we've seen him wearing the captain's armband for the U.S. in a while. Early on in the match, he was immediately getting in there. I think he missed a chance, within the first 15 minutes where he beats everyone on the pitch and then just puts it over the net. But, he was consistently dangerous down that flank. Tim Weah down the other side was really good as well. And Gio Reyna, maybe the most engaged we've seen him in a U.S. kit for a while. He takes that elbow, he gets up, he's encouraging the crowd after winning a foul shortly thereafter. So, the stars on this team really showed in an important match. So that's going to be very dangerous for Canada. Obviously, those wide threats. We saw Panama a little bit find some joy with their width at times, maybe in the first half, especially when Canada was playing a little bit more forward. So yeah, I think that those are the main threats that Canada are really going to have to worry about. And it's the obvious suspects, but those guys haven't always been playing up to the standard.
For sure. And we know that that's a talented American team.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that they played up to the standard that they're capable of in either game against Canada in World Cup qualifying.
No.
Right? Certainly not in Hamilton at Tim Hortons Field, which was, I think, one of the lower points that program has had in the last maybe 2 years. But I think if I'm Canada, I'm pretty happy that I don't have to see Serginho Dest on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
He was one of the bigger threats for the U.S. in that game. Obviously, he's had a bit of a rough go at club level the last couple of years, trying to find his place and even trying to find his place in the U.S. squad. But he's obviously a talented player. There's a reason that Barcelona signed him in the first place, and a reason that he's continued to play in top leagues in Europe. And I think that this is going to be a real fight for Canada. It's going to be a tough game. But the thing that I think maybe gives Canada advantage is I think that last night was a final for the U.S. far more than it was for Canada, who are here to win 2 games, to manage a tournament and win a trophy. Whereas the U.S., every time they play Mexico, that is a final for them. And it certainly felt like one last night. And obviously they'll come into this Canada game wanting to win that trophy. And there's nothing quite the same as actually playing in a final and winning a final. But I do wonder if maybe there's a little bit more in the tank for Canada coming into this game. Maybe that's just wishful thinking. Hopefully, I think we'll get to one more question, and then we're bringing in a good friend of the show live from Las Vegas.
Alfonso.
It's not Alfonso. It's not Alfonso. But before we get to our good friend KJ, let's get to Vincent's question here. Were you guys surprised it was Kennedy sent on at right center back and not Zator? Scott was good, but he looked uncomfortable when he had to pass out of the back and was refusing to use his right foot. It's a good question. I mean, we as the media of the Canadian Premier League would love to see Dominic Zator get into a game. I don't think that's a question, but I'm not at all surprised. I think Scott Kennedy is the one that has shown John Herdman that he can trust him, that he can play in those difficult moments in times when a game is certainly not sealed away and in the bag, right, Mitchell? Like there's no real question as to who he calls on first off that bench in the defense.
No, for sure. It's been a while since John Herdman's been experimental with who he puts on that pitch. I mean, basically the entire World Cup qualifying cycle, he found his guys. And if he made a change, it was basically due to injuries. But even then, you kind of knew who was coming off the bench. What roles they play, how they play any given match is can change, but he's got his guys. And again, Kennedy's just shown so well. He was excellent in that match against Honduras the last time out. So, I don't think there's any surprise there. Obviously, it'd be nice to see Zats get on the field. It'd be nice to see Latori get on the field, but I feel like that might be more something we see at the Gold Cup than in a Nations League, where obviously results are first and foremost.
I think so too. I think this is, Canada keep talking about wanting to play for a trophy, and you put the players that you trust on the pitch in those moments. All right, before we get to some more questions, we are going to welcome in from Las Vegas, Mr. Christian Jack, who I'm sure everybody in the stream has been actually here to see. KJ, you've been in Vegas. You have been on the ground there for a couple of fascinating football matches at Allegiant Stadium last night. Just start by telling us what it was like being there, being in that stadium, and seeing, Canada's superstars come up and really win the day for them.
Yeah, I hope you guys were well. Good to see you guys. It was a pretty crazy experience. It was one of those where you don't really have like the double headers too often in different stadiums, and it felt a little bit very much like Canada was the appetizer to the main course. But it was kind of nice that so many people, I think, joined the Canada game quite early. I mean, I know when we were doing our pregame show, there wasn't that many people in there, but by the time it started, there was probably at least 10 or 15,000. And then by the second half, you could say at least probably 40,000 were watching Canada, which was really good to see. So it definitely, contributed to the atmosphere. I think at one point, the Mexican fans went to the Voyageurs and started a Mexico chant between the two of them at one point, which was interesting. So it was fascinating. The stadium's a palace, it's an incredible place to see sports. No expense spared at all for the place. And again, just another example of Canada going to a different environment, not being intimidated, being prepared to win the game. And I thought it was relatively comfortable. I mean, listening to what you guys were saying, I think you guys agree. Yes, Milan Boyan had saves to make, but ones you'd certainly expect him to save. And in the end, they managed their way to get through it. And it was always a little bit of a gift. No disrespect to Panama, to avoid those giants. I think, Canada's quest to win this trophy was certainly made easier by the fact that they didn't have to beat both Mexico and the United States. And now they just have to beat one. And it just happens to be the US, which I think is pretty fitting. Herdman, in the press conference at the very beginning of this tournament, said that he would like to play the US. He gets what he wants. I think we all get what we want on Sunday. So let's see what happens with Canada.
Yeah, I think John Herdman has been clear before that he is interested in stoking the fires of a Canada-U.S. rivalry. Again, we've seen what it's like when the U.S. plays Mexico. Kristen, you were there for that one as well. That must have been something else. That game looked on the pitch. It was incredible. It was heated. The U.S. the much better team in that game, and just the event itself must have been pretty special to be in the building for.
Yeah, it was chaotic, really. I mean, from my end, obviously, I want to see the game. We do our post-match press conference. Sorry, we do our post-match analysis on One Soccer, and then the warm-ups start behind us. So it's all getting ready to go. We've got Mexican media right next to us. We were right next to Univision, who weren't very happy with me because I was in their shot, even though I stayed in my very small box that I was allowed to stay in. I kept getting elbowed to the side. So it's all going off, right? And then the Americans come out and they're warming up a lot longer than Mexico, and then eventually it was almost like that prized boxer or that wrestler who's coming in waiting for the sound, and then they start walking in for their warm-ups and the place goes crazy. Like the entrance coming in for the Mexicans for the warm-up, which was pretty special. And then after that, just before close to kickoff, I left because I didn't leave the stadium, but I went to the mix zone to talk to the Canadian players. So much of the first half an hour, I didn't see much of the game. And then I got into my position and watched the rest of it. And yeah, as you mentioned, it was just nuts. It was very CONCACAF in a way. You do get to see that kind of stuff in South America as well, where, emotions certainly are boiling over. when you could analyze a football match in between all the whistles and all the nonsense, it was clear that there was one team that was far superior than the other. And I think that will frustrate the US. I think Pulisic mentioned it a little bit last night in terms of like, they were just way better than them. Like, why did they bother getting involved with that nonsense? Because now it's cost them, right? To Canada's game that here we go. Dest, who's been very good, but I think McKennie, who I think is really, I think he's an enormous part of the heartbeat of that team, and he's won big games for them in the past. The fact that he's not in there is a huge boost for Canada.
It certainly is. It's. I mean, for me, when I see Christian Pulisic come out of the game late, I'm like, it's not because they're saving his energy for Canada. It's because they don't want him to get jumped late in the game and haven't taken another one of these retaliatory red cards, and then they're down 3 of their best players in the final. Let's take a look for this final then. Canada, the US, for a trophy. It's something that Canada haven't had a lot of opportunities to do. They haven't played a final since 2000. They certainly haven't played the US in a final. I haven't looked this one up, but I'm sure possibly never. Mitchell, let's start with you though. What do you think? What are Canada's chances here? What do you think needs to go right for them in a game of this magnitude, which means obviously so much for the program?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one because there's the emotions for both sides. I mean, for the U.S., obviously coming off an incredibly emotional semifinal and managing that, and obviously, missing 2 key players, that has to be factored in. But they've been here before many times. I think it's 6 gold cups and obviously winning the last Nations League since Canada last lifted a continental trophy. So, that finals experience is always important in any sport. But Canada has it in their roster, not necessarily at the international level, but, a lot of the guys have recently played in finals with their club teams, and that hasn't always been the case. And I mean, you look at a guy like Alphonso Davies playing in the biggest club final that there is, over in Europe. So I think that's important. In terms of, this match for Canada, obviously, those key players who've been there for a while and know what these finals are like will be so important. And yeah, I guess just managing the emotions of the moment and the game in a very different match, I think, than the Panama one, where the U.S. will probably be on the front foot for a lot of it, and maybe very similar to the match they played. I believe it was in Nashville during World Cup qualifying. It'll be about those moments when you can catch the U.S. Unaware that will be so important for Canada.
Yeah, I think so too. Christian, you were on the ground. You saw all of these teams play. Are Canada, footballing wise, maybe not psychologically, a more difficult test for the United States than a very disappointing Mexico team?
Oh, I definitely think so. Yeah, I think, the way that the U.S.-Mexico rivalry is turned right now is that the U.S. just they're the big brother bullies. Do you know what I mean? They don't fear anything to do with Mexico. I think there's a little fear factor when it comes to the U.S. towards Canada, just because there is certain profiles of players where they're like, oh, we're going to have to be very different here. Mexico, I just think are very stale, very predictable, very safe in the way that they play. And I think everything against that for Canada. They're not safe. They're not predictable. You know what I mean? They're not stale. They're fast. They can improvise as much as you can score a goal in 6 seconds in a transition. They could also play a ridiculous pass and give it away and lose a goal. It's just the way that Canada are playing at the moment, which is fresh, which is fun. I think it speaks to the personalities of the players. So no, I think to your point, I think the US, will definitely feel football-wise, this will be a bigger test. Although you made a great point earlier, Charlie, and I was thinking about this last night. I think emotionally, that was always going to be their game last night. They have to make sure that isn't their final. They have to make sure that they don't go into this now thinking we've done everything we need to do, because ultimately it comes down to lifting the trophy for them.
It really does. And obviously they take pride in being the top. They want to be the top team in CONCACAF. For them, historically, that's just been being better than Mexico. That doesn't seem like it's the case anymore. I don't think they've lost to Mexico since 2019, which is just outstanding. And obviously there's a bit of a nightmare going on in Mexican football at the moment. I think the second question Diego Coca got in his post-match press conference was, "Have you considered resigning?" But for this U.S. team, they're now aware, I think, that there is another challenge. It's not just CONCACAF is not one game anymore, right? And even if they are playing at home, I have no idea what the atmosphere of the crowd is going to be like in this final on Sunday. But it has to be a big game for them. There's a lot of variables in this US team. We don't know, I think, who's going to be technically their manager on Sunday. To his credit, I think BJ Callahan did a very good job that game with them. We don't know if the Berhalter thing will get over the line, but let's talk about Canada going into this final. We've got a couple of questions about it in the chat. We've talked about some of the tactical things before. I think maybe the best thing for us to do here is to go through who we think might or should start for Canada in this game. And we've got a question from, again, other Mitchell. Dare I say better Mitchell? Sorry, Mr. Tierney. Will we see any new faces in the finals? Latour, Zator. I don't think we're going to see either of them in the final. That'd be great, but I think let's start with you guys. Do you think that they stick with that same kind of shape? Is it the back three again? Mitchell?
Mitch?
Yeah, I think so. I think what the back three maybe with the wing backs offers them, and I think we'll see who they put at the wing back, but the U.S. have those wide threats, and that allows you to kind of double up on those players if they play that defensive style. Pulisic is coming down. You've got a wing back and a right center back who can kind of without pulling so many other players out of shape, who can really focus on him. Same with Weah on the other side. So I like what that presents, and I do think it puts a lot of those Canadian players in their best positions to succeed in terms of some of those guys, Lorea at wing back, and just allows when you've got a bit of a less mobile Vittoria in the middle, who's so great in the air, allows him some of the cover as well. So I think that that's important that they stick with that back three.
It does bring the best out of the players, as you alluded to. Also covers up some issues defensively in a back four. You might not be as comfortable with them. And it's very fluid, right? Like we see a lot of this 3-box-3 where they, the fullbacks will tuck in. We saw yesterday where Adekubi and Lorea Buchanan would get very wide, and then suddenly Eustachio can come deep and send those cross-field balls in between the fullbacks. So I think the key for me will not necessarily be the defense, but how you break down the Americans, because they're very good defensively. And what are they going to do differently to get in behind them a little bit more, which will be really tough. We even saw that in the World Cup. I was fortunate to see the Americans live a number of times. In the end, the Dutch got behind them, and that was a little bit difficult for them. The American media said that Berhalter got out-coached that day. That was maybe a little bit harsh. There was some better players on the other team, but they are very organized. And a lot of their success is that they're very happy to win games 1-0. In the end, last night could have been 1-0. It was 3-0 because of how bad Mexico was, not necessarily because of how great the US was. So I think it was, as you guys alluded to, the fact that Johnston got taken off in a 1-0 game is clearly obvious that they're managing his minutes. And, I would expect him to play. Vittoria didn't necessarily break a sweat really too much. I think he'll probably play as well. We'll find out about Miller. I think Miller had a great game. I would just say that, playing 2 games in 4 days, I think it's pretty obvious that most people would expect him to play. I'll just say this. I think Scott Kennedy is very, very trustworthy now for John Herdman. And although Miller is very good on the ball, you could make the case that defensively, I think that Kennedy brings a different outlook to the game, particularly when you don't have as much possession. So we'll see what they do with that. And then obviously, as you guys alluded to, the big question is in the fullback positions, right? Alphonso Davies looked fine last night, and it'll be a big call if they don't start him from the beginning.
Yeah, I feel like Davies probably has to start at this point. Where is obviously always kind of been the question with him and his team. I personally look at a U.S. team that's probably going to start Joe Scally at right back, and think that maybe you like that matchup if you get Davies in that left wing back spot. And then that maybe allows you to still have Larin, David, Buchanan on the pitch up front. So for me, I think that's probably a consideration for Canada. But then again, for me, the question then becomes in midfield. I think you definitely need that third body in there, as we've alluded to. But the question is, who is that? Is that Jonathan Osorio? Is it Atiba Hutchinson? Is it both of them and not Ismail Kone? Maybe we'll go back to Mitchell again. I don't know what the the best combination there is, but it feels like you definitely need that third person in there, especially against a U.S. team that will probably have a lot of the ball in the middle of the park.
Yeah, and a U.S. team who usually plays with three central midfielders as well. Like you want someone who's keeping an eye on Gio Reyna so they can't just overload you in the center of the park there. The interesting question then, of course, becomes which attacker do you take off so that you can add a third in midfield? And that's a really tricky question because I think based on performance last night, it's probably Kyle Larin. I don't think he had his best game, but he scored against the U.S. the last two times they've played them. So that becomes difficult, and obviously he's one of those guys who can lead the line very well. So it's going to be tricky on that front. But I think it is Osorio. I think we've seen how well he's played against the U.S. in recent matches. Obviously, he was fantastic. I think in the Hamilton match against them, and a guy who brings that emotional energy. So if he's again, fitness is the big question. Is Davies fit? Is Osorio fit? If those guys are 90 minutes fit, not just 90 minutes fit for a regular game, by the way, like 90 minutes fit for a final, that becomes tricky. So I think those are the big questions for me.
Yeah, I think if Osorio plays, and they do play an extra man in there, which I think they probably should, but I don't know whether they will. He hasn't necessarily always done that. He played two-man midfield against Morocco, for what it's worth, in the same kind of system. But if Osorio plays, I think even though he's playing great, the odd man out is probably Larrea. If you look at the past selections and the way that they played this team, I just don't think they'll take out Kyle Larin. I just can't see it. The other thing about what Larin brings is that he allows David to do the dirty work and drop deep. And you look at the Davies goal yesterday, that was because of Jonathan David, and he picks up the ball in that position and he's a little bit deeper. And I know, Jonathan David and Canada like him to have that ability to be a bit more of a freedom role where he can roam, come a little bit deeper, and press so well as well. And when he's leading the line as the 9, I don't necessarily think they get the best out of him in that way.
Yeah, I think it's a lot easier for Jonathan David to be Jonathan David when there is a guy like Kyle Larin who's running at the back line and creating those channels, pulling defenders around. Obviously, last time Canada played the U.S., those two linked up for the first goal in Hamilton. Can't forget that. I think that's probably what you have to go with. This is a difficult game for Canada. Before we kind of wrap up here and maybe just briefly touch on the Canadian Premier League, which obviously there's a lot of other soccer going on in Canada before we get to this game. Guys, you've both been watching Canada for a very long time. What would it mean for this program to not only beat the U.S. in a very competitive game on Sunday, but to lift a trophy? Let's start with Mitchell.
Oh, I think it would be, a monumental moment. I mean, we've had obviously the moment at BMO Field against Jamaica was huge, but there's something to be said about just lifting a trophy, about there being the silverware there, and about being able to point to something like that and saying, we were unequivocally the best, not just that we qualified for a major tournament, but like we were the best at this given time. So I think not only in isolation, like some of Canada's other great successes have happened, like the 2000 Gold Cup on, a coin flip, and then talk about what happened before and after that. I mean, this would be a moment where, this comes off the back of some other great moments and builds that momentum. So, and, again, shows that Canada can win those big games in matches. And again, like as much as they want to look to the future and look to European opponents, like beating CONCACAF opponents consistently over the next number of years, that's how you consistently unlock those big games. So that's their base and most important thing.
Yeah, you guys know me pretty well. I've spent quite a lot of time thinking about this, even overnight here. And, I was thinking, like, obviously a final, the ability to win a game, it is going to bring eyeballs, right? Whether it be different fans, hopefully different media, the world media looking at it a little bit more, the attention on that. Is it really a needle mover for the sport in the country? And I think we're going to find out. Unfortunately, which goes against against my nature, I'm a little bit pessimistic about it. I just hope that I'm wrong. I don't know if it's going to be a significant needle mover. So for me to settle on this, I think the key thing for this game is those players. It's the game for them. We can talk about the big culture move and what we need to do in this country, and hopefully it's going to move the needle. it's not the biggest game because they played in a World Cup, but it's going to be their biggest game between now and the World Cup. It's just there's not going to be another bigger game than this. You can't tell me there is. A game against Messi in a Copa America, okay, that's a big game in a different aspect. But the tangible measurements that come with winning a tournament and beating the United States and being a continental champion, and actually having something of meaning to hold and lift and remember by, all of that trumps playing whoever you're going to play in a Copa America, and they're not going to win a Copa America. So I just think, ultimately this is their biggest game between now and kicking off the World Cup in home soil in 2026. So it's about the program. It's about the players. I talked to them, a few of them last night. Richie Larios told me, like, we deserve to be here. And I think that they believe that they're going to win this. And that's the key. They have to believe that they can win, and that ability to take the past results against these teams in Gold Cups and World Cup qualifiers and know that they definitely left their mark on the United States in the past, that they belong on the same pitch as them, I think is half the battle before the ball is kicked, to know that, yes, we can win this game. It's a battle of the mind, and then going out there and doing it on the pitch.
Absolutely. It's monumental. This is a big deal. I think everybody, tell your friends that Canada is playing in a final on Sunday. Anybody who watches the Premier League in this country can watch that game on Fubo, thanks to One Soccer. And it's a really special moment. Obviously, one that we've been waiting quite a while for to get to this point. I will say now, our intrepid reporter Benedict Rhodes has also been going around the CPL asking some coaches from the league as we prepare for this weekend of matches about this moment as well. So before we go, let's just hear from Pacific FC's head coach James Merriman and his own thoughts on this game.
Yeah, I think you see what it means to the players. They want to win that match. It sets up against the U.S. as well, which is arguably our bigger rivals than Mexico. So I think John and the staff and the way that the team is, everybody's following this group of players, and Atiba as well, announcing his retirement. So we hope that they get a great result on Sunday and we can enjoy that.
Absolutely. And lastly, again, if you can't wait for Sunday to watch Canadian soccer, we've got 4 Canadian Premier League games coming up again on One Soccer, starting tonight. In the Tony Bet Match of the Week, Valor taking on Forge Hamilton. Mitchell, you will be watching that game for us. That'll be a lot of fun. We've got 2 games at the same time tomorrow afternoon: Halifax Cavalry and Atletico Ottawa Vancouver FC. I guess take your pick. Maybe watch both 2 screens. That's probably what I'm going to do. But those are both exciting games. And then we've got a top-of-the-table clash on Sunday afternoon between Pacific and York United, which will lead in nicely, I think, to our final on Sunday when Canada take on the United States again on One Soccer. I believe 8:30 p.m. Eastern. Is that right?
Yes.
On One Soccer. Anyway, gentlemen, I appreciate you guys taking the time this morning for Christian. I'm sure you are dying to get back into the sweltering Nevada heat this afternoon.
It's actually raining here, and the heat is broken. Yeah, it's like 65 right now, like 19, whatever it is. Yeah, so it's it's a rainy day here, but thankfully the Golden Knights have their parade tomorrow, not today.
Oh, good. Yeah, that will be fun. So anyway, Canada on Sunday trying to become the second team to lift a trophy in Vegas this week. Mitchell, Christian, thank you guys so much, and we will talk to you all on Monday.